Hello, welcome back. It's Sunday. I just get up and made some bit English video on Dennis. So now I like to read more this aircraft. It's 9:30. I like to read about seaplanes and amphibious aircraft. I have some PDF open, but I was to read about Russian fighter jets like this one. Not do now, let's do it like tomorrow. Because I like to read about MiG 17 and 15 and 9. Not because it's important, but I need to have a kind of plane. I'm not going to spend the next 2 months to read about flying boats, because a lot of old. I like to read this one, just these two flying boats and this aircraft. But I like to read this Intel again, and this one, this company. So let's try to do some of this today. And jet fighters and 6 gen. I like to read all this today, if possible. But let's start do. But the camcorder don't have power enough. Yes, and I need to put that Danish video public. So let's start to do that. Yes. So let's start to read. Then I can do some Danish video. On my plan is to do some video in Danish later about it. But I don't need to do every single one. Yes, I was supposed to do a video in English, but I cannot do that now because my life is how it is. I have all kind of problems in my life every day and week and month. I have to check my cell phone. 79 power.
Seaplane. A Grumman G111 Albatross amphibious flying boat landing. A seaplane is a powered fixed-wing aircraft capable of taking off and landing, alighting, on water. 1. Seaplanes are usually divided into two categories based on their technological characteristics: floatplanes and flying boats. The latter are generally far larger and can carry far more. Seaplanes that can also take off and land on airfields are in a subclass called amphibious aircraft, or amphibians. Seaplanes were sometimes called hydroplanes, too, but currently this term applies instead to motor-powered watercraft that used the technique of hydrodynamic lift to skim the surface of water when running at speed. 1. The use of seaplanes gradually tapered off after World War II. Partially because of the investments in airports during the war, but mainly because land planes were less constrained by weather conditions that could result in sea states being too high to operate seaplanes, while land planes could continue to operate. In the 21st century, seaplanes maintain a few niche uses, such as for aerial firefighting, air transport around archipelagos, and access to undeveloped or roadless areas, some of which have numerous lakes. Types. The word seaplane is used to describe two types of air-forward/water vehicles: the floatplane and the flying boat. A floatplane has slender floats, mounted under the fuselage. Two floats are common, but other configurations are possible. Only the floats of a floatplane normally come into contact with water. The fuselage remains above water. Some small land aircraft can be modified to become float planes, and in general, float planes are small aircraft. Float planes are limited by their inability to handle wave heights typically greater than 12 inches, 0.31 m. These floats sit to the empty weight of the airplane and to the drag coefficient, resulting in reduced seat payload capacity, slower rate of climb, and slower cruise speed. De Havilland Otter float plane in a flying boat. The main source of buoyancy is the fuselage, which acts like a ship's hull in the water because the fuselage's underside has been hydrodynamically shaped to allow water to flow around it. Most flying boats have small floats mounted on their wings to keep them stable. Not all small seaplanes have been float planes, but most large seaplanes have been flying boats, with their great weight supported by their hulls. The term seaplane is used by some instead of float plane. This is standard British usage. 1. 3. This article treats both flying boats, 4, and float planes, 5, as types of seaplane, 6, in the US fashion. An amphibious aircraft can take off and land both on conventional runways and water. A true seaplane can only take off and land on water. There are amphibious flying boats and amphibious float planes, as well as some hybrid designs, for example, float planes with retractable floats. Modern, 2019. Production seaplanes range in size from flying boat type light sport aircraft amphibians such as the Icona 5 and Air Max C-Max, to the 100,000-pound Shinmeiwa US-2 and Beriv B-200 multi-role amphibians. Examples in between include the Dornier Seaster flying boat type, 12-seat, utility amphibian and the Canadair CL-415 amphibious water bomber. The Viking Air DHC-6 Twin Otter and Cessna Caravan utility aircraft have landing gear options which include amphibious floats. History. Early pioneers. Gabriel Vrazin, air pioneer who made one of the earliest flights in a Seaplane, with Henry Farman, left. In 1908 the Frenchman Alphonse Pinard filed the first patent for a flying machine with a boat hull and retractable landing gear in 1876, but Austrian Wilhelm Kress is credited with building the first seaplane, Drachenflieger, in 1898 although its 230 HP, 22 kilowatts, Daimler engines were inadequate for takeoff, and it later sank when one of its two floats collapsed. 7. On the 6th of June, 1905, Gabriel Vrazin took off and landed on the River Seine with a towed kite glider on floats. The first of his unpowered flights was 150 yards, 140 m. 7. He later built a powered float plane in partnership with Louis Blériot, but the machine was unsuccessful. Other pioneers also attempted to attach floats to aircraft in Britain, Australia, France and the United States. On the 28th of March, 1910, Frenchman Henri Fabre flew the first successful powered seaplane, the Gnome Omega-powered Hydravion, a trimaran float plane. 8. Fabre's first successful takeoff and landing by a powered seaplane inspired other aviators, and he designed floats for several other flyers. The first hydro-aeroplane competition was held in Monaco in March 1912, featuring aircraft using floats from Fabre, Curtiss, Tellier and Farman. This led to the first scheduled seaplane passenger services, at Aix-les-Bains, using a 5-seat Sanchez Bissa from the 1st of August 1912. 7. The French Navy ordered its first float plane in 1912. On the 10th of May, 1912 Glenn L. Martin flew a homemade seaplane in California, setting records for distance and time. 9. In 1911-12, François Denhaut constructed the first seaplane with a fuselage forming a hull, using various designs to give hydrodynamic lift at takeoff. Its first successful flight was on the 13th of April 1912.7. Throughout 1910 and 1911, American pioneering aviator Glenn Curtiss developed his float plane into the successful Curtiss Model D land plane, which used a larger central float and sponsons. Combining floats with wheels, he made the first amphibian flights in February 1911 and was awarded the first Collier Trophy for U.S. flight achievement. From 1912, his experiments with a hulled seaplane resulted in the 1913 Model E and Model F, which he called Flying Boats. 7. In February 1911, the United States Navy took delivery of the Curtiss Model E and soon tested landings on and takeoffs from ships, using the Curtiss Model D. In Britain, Captain Edward Wakefield and Oscar Nospelius began to explore the feasibility of flight from water in 1908. They decided to make use of Windermere in the Lake District, England's largest lake. The latter's first attempts to fly attracted large crowds, though the aircraft failed to take off and required a redesign of the floats incorporating features from the boat hulls of the Lakes Motor Boat Racing Club member Isaac Bowick. Meanwhile, Wakefield ordered a float plane similar to the design of the 1910 Fabra Hydravion. By November 1911, both Nospelius and Wakefield had aircraft capable of flight from water and awaited suitable weather conditions. Nospelius's flight was short-lived, as the aircraft crashed into the lake. Wakefield's pilot, however, taking advantage of a light northerly wind, successfully took off and for what a height of 50 feet, 15 m, to Ferry Nab, where he made a wide turn and returned for a perfect landing on the lake's surface. In Switzerland, Emile Tadioli equipped the Dufo 4 biplane with swimmers and successfully took off in 1912. A seaplane was used during the Balkan Wars in 1913, when a Greek Astra Hydravion did reconnaissance of the Turkish fleet and dropped 4 bombs. 10. 11. Birth of an industry. In 1913, the Daily Mail newspaper put up a £10,000 prize for the first non-stop aerial crossing of the Atlantic, which was soon enhanced by a further sum from the Women's Aerial League of Great Britain. Curtiss NC Flying Boat NC-3 skims across the water before takeoff. 1919 American businessman Rodman Wanamaker became determined that the prize should go to an American aircraft and commissioned Curtiss Aeroplane and Motor Company to design and build an aircraft capable of making the flight. Curtiss's development of the Flying Fish flying boat in 1913 brought him into contact with John Cyril Porte, a retired Royal Navy lieutenant, aircraft designer and test pilot who was to become an influential British aviation pioneer. Recognizing that many of the early accidents were attributable to a poor understanding of handling while in contact with the water, the pair's efforts went into developing practical hull designs to make the transatlantic crossing possible. 12. The 2 years before World War I's breakout also saw the privately produced pair of Benoist 14 biplaner flying boats, designed by Thomas W. Benoist, initiate the start of the first heavier-than-air airline service anywhere in the world, and the first airline service of any kind at all in the United States. 13. 14. At the same time, the British boat-building firm J. Samuel White of Cowes on the Isle of Wight set up a new aircraft division and produced a flying boat in the United Kingdom. This was displayed at the London Air Show at Olympia in 1913. 15. In that same year, a collaboration between the S.E. Saunders Boatyard off East Cowes and the Soapwith Aviation Company produced the Bat Boat, an aircraft with a consult-aluminated hull that could operate from land or on water, which today is called an amphibious aircraft. 15. The Bat Boat completed several landings on sea and on land and was duly awarded the Mortimer Singer Prize. 15. It was the first all-British aeroplane capable of making 6 return flights over 5 miles within 5 hours. In the US, Wanamaker's commission built on Glenn Curtis's previous development and experience with the Curtiss Model F-16 for the U.S. Navy, which rapidly resulted in the America. Designed under Porte's supervision following his study and rearrangement of the flight plan. The aircraft was a conventional biplanar design with two bay, unstaggered wings of unequal span with two pusher inline engines mounted side by side above the fuselage. In the interplane gap, wingtip pontoons were attached directly below the lower wings near their tips. The design, later developed into the Model H, resembled Curtiss's earlier flying boats but was built considerably larger so it could carry enough fuel to cover 1,100 mi, 1,800 kilometers. The 3 crew members were accommodated in a fully enclosed cabin. Trials of the America began the 23rd of June, 1914 with Porte also as chief test pilot. Testing soon revealed serious shortcomings in the design. It was underpowered, so the engines were replaced with more powerful tractor engines. There was also a tendency for the nose of the aircraft to try to submerge as engine power increased while taxiing on water. This phenomenon had not been encountered before, since Curtiss's earlier design had not used such powerful engines nor large fuel forward/cargo loads and so were relatively more buoyant. In order to counteract this effect, Curtiss fitted fins to the sides of the boat to add hydrodynamic lift, but soon replaced these with sponsons, a type of underwater pontoon mounted in pairs on either side of a hull. These sponsons, or their engineering equivalents, and the flared, notched hull would remain a prominent feature of flying boat hull design in the decades to follow. With the problem resolved, preparations for the crossing resumed. While the craft was found to handle heavily on takeoff, and required rather longer takeoff distances than expected, the full moon on the 5th of August, 1914 was selected for the transatlantic flight. Porte was to pilot the America with George Hallett as co-pilot and mechanic. World War I. Curtiss and Porte's plans were interrupted by the outbreak of World War I. Porte sailed for England on 4 August 1914 and rejoined the Navy as a member of the Royal Naval Air Service. Appointed Squadron Commander of Royal Navy Air Station Hendon, he soon convinced the Admiralty of the potential of flying boats and was put in charge of the Naval Air Station at Felixstowe in 1915. Porte persuaded the Admiralty to commandeer, and later, purchase, the America and a sister craft from Curtiss. This was followed by an order for 12 more similar aircraft, one Model H2 and the remaining as Model H4S. 4 examples of the latter were assembled in the UK by Saunders. All of these were similar to the design of the America and indeed, were all referred to as Americas in Royal Navy service. The engines, however, were changed from thunder-powered 160 HP Curtiss engines to 250 HP Rolls-Royce Vulcan engines. The initial batch was followed by an order for 50 more, totaling 64 Americas overall during the war. 12. Porte also acquired permission to modify and experiment with the Curtiss aircraft. The Curtiss H-4S were soon found to have a number of problems. They were underpowered, their hulls were too weak for sustained operations, and they had poor handling characteristics when afloat or taking off. 17. 18. One flying boat pilot, Major Theodore Douglas Hallam, wrote that they were comic machines. Weighing well under 2 tons, with 2 comic engines giving, when they functioned, 180 horsepower, and comic control, being nose-heavy with engines on and tail-heavy in a glide. 19. The Felixstowe F.2, the first production seaplane, and the basis for future development at Felixstowe. Porte made advances in flying boat design and developed a practical hull design with the distinctive Felixstowe notch. 20. Porte's first design to be implemented in Felixstowe was Felixstowe Porte Baby, a large, 3-engined biplane flying boat. powered by one central pusher and two outboard tractor Rolls-Royce Eagle engines. Port A modified an H4 with a new hull whose improved hydrodynamic qualities made taxiing, takeoff and landing much